Morning, folks. Share here on Friday, the 21st of October. No news today, and as you can see, I'm having lots of issues with my own kit. No power again where I live today, so I'm doing this in two different locations. This here, and then the edit somewhere else, which you'll see. And I suppose the only thing to really speak about this morning is the result last night and where that leaves Leeds United going into the Fulham game, Liverpool, and up until the international break. And I wanted to look at this in a slightly different way. Last night on the American Leeds podcast, we did an initial reaction to how we felt about it. A lot of question marks around Jesse Marsch and his future, a lot of question marks around the players and the board. So what I want to do is look at this in a slightly different way before I start pointing fingers at anybody to blame. I want to kind of do this, and this channel's always been about balanced and kind of a fair approach to things. So I want to look at this in three different areas. I want to look at this in the players area, I want to look at it from a manager's perspective, and I want to look at it from the board. And we can see where different stuff lies, and we'll try and answer some questions as we go through it as well. The other thing as well is I saw a lot of criticism this morning online about the fans chanting Marcelo Bielsa's name last night. And the way I look at it, this is there's 200 fans have travelled, or a lot of fans have travelled over 200 miles down to a game to watch what was an appalling performance. And I'm of the mind that you can chant what you want. You've paid to do that. You've paid for the right to go down there, and you can vent that frustration whenever way you see fit, as long as it's peaceful. The only area with that kind of concerns me is the reality situation is there is no version of this where Marcelo Bielsa comes back to Leeds. It's just not going to happen. So calling for the manager to be sacked might be a fair shout, and we'll get into that. But he won't be getting replaced by Marcelo Bielsa. There's no version of that where a proud man like Bielsa comes back to Leeds. So we'll crack on, and we'll start off talking about the players. So what I want to look at here is the way I view football, and from having a coaching background and a manager's background as well, is the first things first are the players on the pitch good enough to put the style of play the manager and the board want? Because bear in mind, Leeds want to play as a club this attractive playing style. That's what they want. And they brought in a manager to replace Bielsa, who could play a similar style, but not exactly, but just high pressing, high paced game. And it hasn't really worked. So when you look at the player situation, especially last night, and you look at the changes that were made coming into the game that really didn't need to be made, dropping Liam Cooper for this game, when it was a must win, at least a must draw, was a strange decision. I am critical of Liam Cooper most of the time, but what I will say is he is a slightly better defender than Diego Llorente, but he's a much better organiser than Diego Llorente. To see Junior Firpo and Diego Llorente not only in the same starting 11 together, but on the same side of the pitch at the start of the game was a real worry. And we'll talk about that. So if we look at Llorente's characteristics, again last night, caught on the ball more often than he should have been, doing Cruyff turns in his own penalty area and then pointing the finger of blame at other people. Diego Llorente is not good enough for this level of football and is not good enough to play in this style of team. Could he play in a three at the back with Stroke and Cooper or Koch and Cooper? I think he could. I think that would get the best out of him. I think Leeds' best defensive formation would be a three-man defence with Cooper in the middle where his pace isn't going to be an issue. Koch on one side of him, Llorente the other side of him, or Stroke there as well. I think that's the best way to look at it, and I think that's probably the best way to get the most out of them and to make us a bit more solid, because it is too easy to score goals against us. Far too easy. So the first thing is, are the players good enough? And you've got this split. You have a system and a style that Leeds want to play, and they've brought players in to play that system. But they haven't brought in enough. So you've got this split down the middle of the squad of players that are good enough to play this system and understand this system, and players that were here last year and maybe can't adapt to this system and couldn't do it last year, which is why Jesse Marsch had to change his system. We said it on the podcast last night, and I'll always say this. Myself and my brother had this conversation an awful lot. He's an Aston Villa fan, so he's dealing with Steven Gerrard getting fired, which he's pretty happy about, to be honest. We'll get to him. If you don't, you either bring players in that are good enough to play the style of play you want to play. If that can't be done, then you modify your system to get the most out of the players that you have. And the players that we have currently, and if you go through them, Firpo especially, not good enough. The amount of times there's these little bendy balls played around the back of him down the sideline, which are too easy. There's a basic outside pass around the back of a fullback, and he got fuck off 5 or 6 times, and one of the goals comes from that side as well. And you can question where he was for the first one as well. His positioning's not great. And I want him to do well. And I said, yes, I think he'll suit Jesse Marsch's system in an attacking sense. But I also said on Twitter last night, Junior Firpo is a bad defender. Full stop. No caveats. No buts, no maybes. He's not good enough. He's just not good enough. And there's 2 managers now have gone through him where he hasn't been good enough. He's not reliable enough in terms of fitness. He's not calm enough in terms of suspensions. And he hasn't got the quality play in this team. And he shows that by his bad positioning and getting caught out. Not good enough. Llorente also not good enough. You've got to start looking at players like even Pat Bamford looked so off the pace of last night. And I get it. We all want Pat Bamford to do well, and so do I. But how long are we willing to wait for that to happen? And we're going to keep sacrificing points. Rodrigo also not good enough to play in that role either. And this is where we move on to the board. The board are responsible for putting the players on the pitch to fit the system that they want from their manager. That is their job. And I think we can say pretty clearly that the board had a very strong start to January or the summer transfer window and did very well with that, but didn't finish the jigsaw and left it open. And they did this last year. I have no issue with people making mistakes, managers making mistakes, or chairman making mistakes, or head of recruitment making mistakes. But you've got to learn from those mistakes and not repeat the same mistake. It's okay to make mistakes, but make new ones. Don't keep making the same old ones. And we left ourselves in a position, we spoke about this with Adam Pope on the show as well, about leaving ourselves in a position where we might get caught out at left back and we might regret not getting a striker, a proper striker. And Willie Gnonto falls into this, unfortunately. He's an Italian international that Roberto Mancini has no problem playing in the Italian national team and has scored at that level, but Jesse Marsch won't even bring off the bench. And that's a concern. That means we didn't sign a striker on deadline day. That's just the reality of it. When you go through that, you look at the midfield. I think our midfield too, okay. Rocky, yes, had a bad game. Adams didn't have a great game, but they've been pretty consistent all season, and one bad game doesn't make a bad player. They're fine for me. They're okay for me. But we've left ourselves in a position where we've left ourselves short at left back and we've left ourselves short up front, and possibly should have brought in another centre defender. And I called for that at the start of the season. And we're looking at now where 3 areas of the park that caused those problems last night and caused those problems when we played Brentford and Crystal Palace as well. Not being able to finish chances that we're creating. And we're creating a lot of chances. Have we got a striker who could take half the chances Pat Bamford gets in a game, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in. That's a factual reality. So the board have made a huge mistake here. They made a huge mistake in not giving the manager the players that he needs in order to carry out the system that they want played. And then that brings us to the manager. Now, Jesse Marsch last night made some bizarre selection decisions. And I think the quote I used from Dodgeball on Twitter last night was, it's a bold strategy, Cotton, but let's see if it pays off. And it really didn't. And it didn't look like it was going to pay off from very early on. The team was very sluggish. It was very disjointed. The passing was poor. I heard a commentator on Premier Sports that I was watching the game on refer to it as like they're just not doing the basics correctly. And that's a horrible situation. You've got to build from the back in any team, especially when you're taking over a team that was in a relegation dogfight last year and conceded goals. You've got to build from the back, and you've got to make sure you stop conceding goals. Right now, for me, Leeds should be going to certain games looking at it going, look, we want to get out 3 points in the win here, but the most important thing is that we don't lose the game. It's important to pick up points along the way. We've lost too many games where we should have gotten a draw from it, or we should have won. We've thrown away leads. We've thrown away games where we should have been dominant and finished games off before the opposition got into the game. And that sits with the manager. The team selection last night to rest Liam Cooper, after seeing what Diego Llorente has been like this season, you can't be surprised with what happened last night. You just can't. Pascal Stroke being injured, fair enough. That's a forced hand. Firpo comes in. But at that point, I'm thinking, I'm bringing in the defender. I'm not going to change the back 4 too much. I'm going to try and leave Cooper there. And I thought when Cooper came on last night in the second half, we at least looked a bit calmer at the back, a little more organised and less panicky. Robin Koch is a smashing centre back and is going to be probably the best centre back we're going to have, hopefully, for the next couple of years. But even he looks nervous playing beside Llorente. He's constantly waiting to see what he does so he can react to it, to cover him. And he's just not good enough. But Jesse puts him in there to play a system. Jesse decides to start Pat Bamford and bring in Chris Somerville as well. And for the first 60 minutes of the game, Chris Somerville wasn't in it. And there's an argument for the goal that comes in from the right-hand side where it's passed across the box all the way to the far side and then tapped in by Ashley Barnes. There's an argument to say, well, where was Christensen or why was he free? And the way you should look at it is this. There's our back 4. When the ball is played around the side of Firpo is now out of the game. He's gone. Llorente has to come across to cover. So he comes across to cover. That means Koch has to come across and cover his man. So he steps across and covers that man. And then Christensen has to step across and cover his man. Now, one of 2 things should happen. Chris Somerville should be dropping back in to cover, help out defensively here. He's not there. Or Tyler Adams or Mark Rocket drop in and cover that player there, which didn't happen. So from a defensive organisational point of view, It wasn't there. It was poor. And it showed up. Going forward, pretty toothless. The last half an hour, Chris Somerville was fine until he got into the game the last 30 minutes of the game. But he really struggled in the first 60 in terms of the amount of work he did off the ball. I thought it would be much better with Mateus clicking the 10 and Aronson out on the right and do it that way. Aronson overcarried the ball last night. There was so much wrong with last night in terms of individual errors with players that you kind of feel sorry for the manager to a degree. But then you look at the changes that he made off the bench as well. And we played 3 separate systems last night. We started off with the standard 4-2-3-1, tight, narrow. We moved to a 4-4-2 and a diamond. And then we went back to a wider version of the 4-2-3-1 towards the end of the game. The changes were bad. They were badly timed. They didn't make sense. Taking off Sinistera when he looked at the only goal threat that we had was a bizarre move. I get that you're trying to impact the game, but, you know, in its merits. So for me, I thought he let himself down there last night. And here's the kicker for me. This is where I'll kind of wrap it up. We keep talking, and this was the point made last night on the podcast. We keep talking about what's Jesse Marsch's style. And we see glimpses of this high-paced, high-pressure, kind of frantic play. And we think that that's it. And we're going to see more of this. It's going to get better and grow and grow. And then the Chelsea game happens, and everyone says, that's it. That's the thing we've all been talking about. That's it right there. That's the thing. That's Jesse Marsch's system. And then it doesn't happen for a couple of games after that. In patches, yeah, but not in full. Then Arsenal happens, and you're like, that's it. That's the thing. That's the system we're talking about. That's Jesse Marsch's style. But when you look back over 10 games, and bearing in mind, Leeds have now got 9 points from 10 games. This time last year under Bielsa, we had 10 points in 10 games, and Marcelo was under pressure. We're in a worse place than we were after a better start. When you look at that, you've got to start saying, is that Jesse Marsch's system that we saw against Chelsea and Arsenal? Or are those 2 outliers? They're two games that just happen to happen. As I say, a broken clock is right twice a day. Did it just click on those 2 particular days and they were an accident and we're being told that's the system? Or is that actually the system we're trying to play to and get to? And I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Because the bulk of what we've seen this season has been disjointed performances, you know, outside of the odd moment of excitement. And I said on Sunday, in talking about going from polls, that we were 2 or 3 players off being a very good team. I still believe that to be the case. A left back, a centre back and a striker. But we can look really, really average at times as well. That is not a good Leicester side last night. They're missing 6 first-team players, and they were rock bottom of the league, having conceded more goals than any other team in the Premier League this season. We didn't really test them. We 10 or 12 shots, 4 on target in the entire 90 minutes. They had 2. They scored 2. So that's where it is. I don't know who you blame or who you point the finger at, but just ask yourself this question before you go down that rabbit hole, and I'd love to hear your comments on this as well. If you sack Jesse Marsch, will the board back the next guy to bring in the players to finish the puzzle? And I don't know if they will. If you replace Jesse Marsch, will that manager be able to get more out of these players than Jesse Marsch is? Are they good enough? And if you replace the manager, who do you replace him with that A, wants this job, B, is good enough for this job, and C, can actually come in right now and do it? And I don't know the answer to that. A lot of talk about Steven Gerrard taking over Leeds this morning. I would be very clear on my feelings on this, having a brother who's worked under or watched his team play under Steven Gerrard. Steven Gerrard has no discernible style of football. None. My brother has said on a regular basis he doesn't know what he's trying to do. It hasn't changed since the last manager. It just looks like there's better players that can't play. Steven Gerrard is not a good manager, and I would never, ever want to see him manage Leeds United. And that's as direct as I can be. But there you go, folks. It's a tough day. There's a massive game against Fulham now to make things better. We'll see if we can. And hopefully I'll see you back here tomorrow morning with some better news. And thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel as always. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.